Welcome to our fourth podcast on this Fireside Chat series. In this session, we will continue talking about inflation and government policies. With Fed Chairman Powell's speech last Friday, government policy to control inflation became the focus now in the market.
Fed's Friday talks were very hawkish and suggest that there is a long way to go until the inflation rate reaches their 2% target.
I think it will take 2 years for inflation to come down to the 2% target. David, maybe we need to give some background or colors on what the central bank needs to do to bring inflation down.
Yes, let us talk about central bank policy first. Today's hyperinflation is similar to the 1970s, according to the study done by Larry Summers. We should look at what Paul Volcker did successfully at that time to see what the central bank should do now.
So what is the story about Paul Volcker successfully combating hyperinflation at the time?
There was a period of very high inflation that started in the mid-1960s and continued in the 1970s. In October 1979, new Fed Chairman Paul Volcker made bold changes to the previously misguided monetary policies. Paul Volcker's new policy was successful, and it set the table for the strong economic expansions of the 1980s and 1990s.
How bad was this period of inflation?
In fact, this period was called the Great Inflation. The inflation rate in 1965 was very low, a mere 1%. It rose to 14% by the middle of the 1970s.
David, oil prices are still high right now. What happened to the oil prices at that time?
Mark Twain once said that history never repeats itself, but it does often rhyme. Oil prices skyrocketed 4 times. Presidents Richard Nixon and Jimmy Carter tried to impose price controls, but the results ended up being disastrous. So what did Volcker do?
Basically, Volcker raised interest rates and tightened money supply. The prime lending rate rose to more than 21%. He made it clear that the days of easy credit were over, and now credit became very expensive.
Do you know what we learned from the 1970s?
We learned that the Fed should act as quick as possible. The Fed did a very good job to provide stimulants to the economy when COVID hit the world, but they moved a little bit too slow regarding ending quantitative easing. For the Fed to be effective, it must have the confidence of the markets and the public. During the 1960s and early 1970s, but they always backed down when the complaints about the resulting higher cost of credit grew louder.
Is it costly to bring inflation down?
It is extremely costly to bring inflation down if inflation expectations don't come down. Not until Volcker showed that the Fed could take the heat did the markets believe that the Fed was serious this time. The third lesson is that the Fed can only achieve its goals of maximum sustainable employment if it's successful in achieving its goal of price stability.
Yes, the old idea is that we can keep the inflation to increase employment, and that idea is actually seriously flawed because higher inflation eventually destroys rather than creates jobs. I think the Fed is doing the right job by lowering the expectation for GDP growth and settling a reasonable expectation for the rate increase. I think the Fed will continue raising the interest rate 2 to 3 times by the end of this year. We will likely see a soft landing of the economy for the next 3 to 4 quarters.
If an economic recession finally happens, what should low-income families do to handle this environment?
Let's talk about this in our next video. Thank you so much for watching. Follow us if you enjoyed the video, and have a great day.